Today we're going over exactly what cuts come from the hindquarter of a deer. By the end of this video, you'll know what each cut is called, where each cut is located, and what each cut is best used for. Having all of this information will help you make the most of your deer, and it will help you be a little more informed when you take your deer to the butcher or when you are processing it yourself at home. Let's jump right into it. I've been butchering my own wild game animals myself at home for the last decade. And over the years, I've learned a lot about what I like, what I don't like, what works for certain cuts, what doesn't really work for certain cuts. And I will be sharing all of that knowledge in today's video. Now, the footage that you'll be watching is me breaking down the hindquarter of a deer that I harvested and butchered myself in Pennsylvania. And the way I'm going to break this down is in order of how you would actually pull the cuts off of the hindquarter. Little disclaimer, there are a million ways to skin a cat, a million different ways to butcher a deer. This is just how I do it. And if you're curious about the full process of exactly how to break down the hindquarter, I have videos on that I will link below. Now, the very first cut that you will pull off the animal is the shank. This is the lower portion of the leg. It's comprised of a bunch of different muscle groups, and these muscles are put to work. So they are very tough. They are not tender whatsoever. There's a lot of connective tissue, tendons, and ligaments. That's not really pleasant unless you cook it low and slow. So in my eyes, there's really only two options for the shank. You can cook it low and slow until everything falls off the bone, or you can grind it. When I'm grinding the shank, I cut all of the meat off the bone and then trim away all of the thick, tough tendons. You are not going to make much of a difference in the end product by spending your time cutting away all of the silver skin and connective tissue on the shank because there's so much of it. Just focus on the big, thick tendons. If you're going to cook it low and slow, there are a couple different ways you can do this. Think of a crock pot or using a Dutch oven and braising the shanks. And if you want to be really fancy, you can take a bone saw and cut little cross sections of the shank to make these beautiful sort of medallions that sit nicely in the pan. It presents really well. So if you're trying to make something a little special for your dinner guests, it will look really nice that way. Next cut you will remove from the hindquarter is actually a bone. This is the femur bone, and it is great for making stocks or soups, and I feel like it's worth mentioning. The next cut is called the top round. The top round is made up of a couple different muscle groups that are all combined together. You can choose to keep them all together. The top round will look a little bit heart-shaped if you do. Or you can cut up each individual muscle group, which is what I like to do. So my preference is to grind all of the smaller pieces and then keep the largest muscle group as a roast. Because I keep it whole as a roast, I can choose to pull it out of the freezer and do other things with it in the future. So I can cook it as a roast, or I can make sliced jerky from it. I can also grind it, or if your heart so desires, the top round is tender enough that you can make a stir fry or a cheese steak or something where you're slicing the meat very thin and searing it really quickly, keeping it medium rare. It'll be good. But I would not recommend cutting a full-on steak from the top round because it will be a little too tough in my opinion. There may have been times previously in the last decade that I would have cut steaks out of the top round, but just through my experience and own personal preferences, no steaks from the top round any longer. The next cut that comes off the hindquarter is actually a piece left over from the shank. Now, the way that I like to remove the shank requires me to cut directly through the joint. And when you do that, it leaves the top portion of one of the muscle groups that come from the lower leg. So I like to put this right into my grind pile. Next cut, we have the eye of round. Now, the eye of round looks a little bit like a tenderloin. Some people actually refer to the eye of round as the mock tenderloin. It is long and cylindrical, and it only has a little bit of silver skin on the outside that can be easily trimmed away. It's a really beautiful piece of meat without a bunch of silver skin or connective tissue running through it. The eye of round can be used for jerky. You can keep it as a roast. You can also grind it, whatever you prefer. It is not going to be very tender, so I would not recommend making steaks from this. Typically, I like to keep my eye of rounds whole in the freezer so that I can choose what I want to do with them later. I can keep them whole as a roast, I can slice them up for jerky, or I can grind them or cut it up for stew meat. So by keeping it whole, it gives me the ability to be flexible and decide later, which I like. I like having options. The next cut that you will pull off the hindquarter is called the bottom round. The bottom round is kind of long and rectangular shape. It's another one of those cuts that does not have a lot of silver skin running through it, which makes it phenomenal for slicing really thin for jerky. Also makes it a good cut to keep whole for a roast, or of course, put to your grind pile. The bottom round is not considered a tender cut of meat, so I would not recommend it for any type of steaks. I like to do the same thing that I do with pretty much every large cut from the hindquarter. I like to keep it whole in my freezer and then decide what I want to do at a later date. The next cut you will pull off the hindquarter is called the sirloin tip. It's a football-shaped cut of meat. It's made up of a bunch of different muscle groups, and because of that, it has silver skin running through the middle of it, so it's not a great cut for sliced jerky, and it's very tough, so it's definitely not one that I would recommend for steaks. The sirloin tip really shines for roasts. This is one that I love to keep for the crock pot, and you can always grind it up too. The next cut off the hindquarter is called the sirloin butt, and this is the most tender cut from the hindquarter. Now, the reason is because it is essentially an extension of the back strap that goes just beyond the pelvis, and it is the very top of the rump, if you will. The only problem is the sirloin butt is made up of a couple different muscle groups, and there does tend to be quite a bit of silver skin kind of running through all of them. So it does make it tougher to process, but if you're very selective as you slice through it, you can make some really great stir fry, cheesesteak, etc., like very thin sliced meat that you sear really quick. Okay, this is like the same kind of thing that we talked about for the top round. The sirloin butt gives like another stamp of approval for that type of hot, fast cooking because it is on the more tender side compared to everything else from the hindquarter. However, if you don't want to fuss with that, you can always keep it whole as a roast. All of that connective tissue silver skin breaks down beautifully when you cook things low and slow. So you won't have to worry about trimming it away, or you could also include it in your grind pile. No steaks from the top round any longer. The last little bit here is called the tri-tip, and although it can be a really great cut on larger animals, it's just too small to be bothered with on a deer, and I recommend throwing this right into your grind pile. So this is what all of those cuts will look like after that initial breakdown of the hindquarter, and here is what they will look like after you've trimmed and cleaned everything up. Now, there are a couple final thoughts that I have that I want to share with you just from my own experience doing this so much. It is so important to butcher your animal the way that you actually want to eat it. When I first started hunting, I feel like a lot of people kind of shied me away from grinding a lot of the deer. It felt more noble to keep each of these individual cuts whole and try and prepare them in some fancy, cool way, which is fun. And I do like to do that. But frankly, it's just not realistic for all of the time. So what I find works best for me is to keep each of these individual cuts whole when they go into the freezer, and then I can choose when I want to grind it, when I want to keep it whole as a roast. It just gives me all of the options. So point is, butcher your deer however you see fit for you, and hopefully having all this information helps you make the best decision, you know? But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.